Philip Alexander.
Thank you very much. Let me just
share. Thank you for joining us.
So I'm Philip Alexander. I'm an ophthalmologist in Cambridge in the UK. And I'm very excited to speak to you today about Visusnano. So this is a company that I co-founded 5 years ago. And we're a preclinical medical device company, and we're developing a drug-releasing intraocular lens implant to eliminate the need for eye drops after cataract surgery. So we've already heard about the tremendous advances in technology for the treatment of cataract, the various types of lenses that are available. But despite all of that, that improvement in both surgical technology and lens technology, we're still reliant in the vast majority of cases on the patient, because the patient needs to put the eye drops in to get a good visual outcome and a happy patient. And the problem with eye drops is that they can be difficult to administer. 93% of patients do not apply the drops correctly. And there's a growing patient appetite and a patient need for dropless cataract surgery without any eye drops postoperatively. So we have developed a drug-eluting lens implant. So without compromising the optical properties of the lens, our drug-releasing platform allows controlled, sustained release of multiple drugs from the haptics of the intraocular lens implant to avoid the need for eye drops. So far, we've attached 3 drugs to the lens, so we can attach a corticosteroid, a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, and an antibiotic onto the haptics of the IOL. And this has obvious benefits. So it can improve compliance because it doesn't require the patient to use any drops at all. It enhances the patient's experience because it simplifies their post-operative care. But of course, we are expecting it to improve outcomes as well, not just because of the improved compliance, but because we avoid the complications associated with topical medication like corneal melts, which are associated with non-steroidal anti-inflammatories, and preservative toxicity from eye drops. We are in the process of developing another additional drug, an antifibrotic, which we hope will reduce the incidence of posterior capsular opacification. We've done some market research to look at whether there is an appetite for this, and there is a very strong appetite for dropless cataract surgery, both from surgeons and from patients. And there is also a reimbursement potential, because in the US, there is already a licensed intracameral corticosteroid treatment available, and there is a reimbursement code for it. So we expect that there would be a reimbursement code for a dropless drug-eluting lens implant. We know from our market research that 81% of surgeons use 3 different types of drops post-surgery. And the commonest drop regimen is 4 weeks of corticosteroid, 2 to 4 weeks of non-steroidal, and 5 to 7 days of antibiotic. And that can be confusing for patients because it's multiple bottles with different regimens. But we have, as I've said, managed to encapsulate all 3 of these drug classes. So this is our progress so far. We've managed to encapsulate the drugs into our polymer drug delivery system. We have shown attachment of our polymer system to the haptics of the lens. We have, using an in vitro model, a PKI model, showed release of the drug from the lens, and we can demonstrate controlled and sustained release, and I'll show you some data in a minute. We know that the drugs that we are using are safe and effective inside the eye, and we've conducted in vivo rabbit studies which confirm that there is no adverse reaction. So this is a graph showing the dexamethasone release profile. So most surgeons require their patients to use dexamethasone eye drops for approximately 30 days after surgery, 28 days. And we know from the FDA regulation that the dexamethasone therapeutic range is somewhere between 3 and 8 micrograms per milliliter. And we've been able to achieve that. So we've used this PKI model from Opsutics based in London So this uses a model of the eye that mimics the aqueous turnover exactly. So the advantage of this is that it doesn't involve any animal models, but it would mimic the effects of doing an in vivo PK trial. But of course, with this in vitro study, we can sample the eye as often as every hour to determine the concentration of the drug that we need. So this is our dexamethasone dosing, and we've demonstrated that we've got a therapeutic dose for the full 30 days after surgery. We know from the European Society of Cataract and Refractive Surgeon trial that cefuroxime is highly effective in reducing the risk of endophthalmitis. And we also know from that trial, from that paper by David Seal et al., that the minimum inhibitory concentration of cefuroxime needs to be above 8 micrograms per milliliter to prevent infection. And so we have deliberately shortened our drug release for cefuroxime to ensure that we get a high dose of cefuroxime for the time that is when the eye is most at risk of infection, which is the first 7 days. These are some results from our rabbit studies, which show that there's no adverse reaction from the implantation of a drug-eluting lens. So there's no adverse reaction from the polymer or from the injection process of the lens, drug-eluting lens going inside the eye. This study is actually showing the results of ketorolac, and it shows that the amount of inflammation in the treated eyes was less, as you would expect, compared to the control eyes. And it also shows a sustained effect. We've been working with a strategic partner who has conducted some optical quality testing of our combined product. So we have attached our drug delivery system to a commercially available lens, and we've demonstrated that it does not affect the dioptric power of the lens, it does not affect the optical quality of the lens, and it does not affect the injection process. So the lens can be injected into the eye as normal. We have some intellectual property based on how our polymers attach to the lens. We've filed a PCT and we've performed a freedom to operate search. And our patent was granted in Europe and in the US, and we have some divisional applications filed. The reimbursement process varies depending on whereabouts in the world the patient lives. So in the US and in Japan, the cost of eye drops is much higher than it is in Europe. But we're in the process of conducting a cost utility analysis. So even in countries where the cost of eye drops is relatively low, the benefit of having a drug-eluting lens, because the patient doesn't need to put the drops in and it doesn't require any carers or assistants to put the drops in, can be demonstrated. There are a number of other products available at present which are trying to achieve dropless cataract surgery. Most of these are single dose, single drug solutions, and most of them will require a secondary procedure, some other kind of modification to the normal surgical technique. But our device does not require any change to surgical technique. You just put in the lens, inject the lens as normal, and you don't have to do anything different. This is our team. So Joanna Gould and Darren Pitt are my co-founders, and they are CEO and Chief Scientific Officer respectively. David Bailey has a huge wealth of experience in ophthalmology, having worked in J&J and Bausch & Lomb, and then more recently at Star Surgical. And Martina Picardo has lots of experience with early stage companies in the UK. And Paul Rosen, who I'm sure you all know, is a very prominent ophthalmologist and previous president of the ESCRS. And Rob Lowe is our other clinical advisor and is a veterinary ophthalmologist. So thank you very much. So we're Visusnano. We're developing a drug-eluting lens implant for use for patients having cataract surgery, which is completely compatible with the current model of care. It improves compliance, it enhances patient experience, and we expect it to improve outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Very nice presentation. Do you have any question about this presentation? I have a question. Sorry. Yes.
Well, we discussed this slightly before, but in some ways, this is a new technology, putting the drug in the haptic rather than coating the lens. But virtually all devices that have gone in the past have shown a typical pharmaceutical time course to that which you have, i.e. there is enhanced release and then an exponential decay. And the difficulty has been in the past trying to control the rate of decay and the concentration. Now, you've chosen to load to a level such that when you get your exponential decay and reach an asymptotic level, then it's still within the treatment regime. But that means you need to load it higher to begin with. And I noticed the nano in your name, and what several companies are currently trying to do, especially in the cardiovascular field, is to actually introduce pharmaceuticals in devices in which you control the release of one or several drugs by controlling the nanopore size and the almost shattering of nanopores. And there's a company in Guildford called CySaf that has been very successful in developing that sort of model for treating skin with slow release. And I just wonder, how you, if you think there is a problem, or you just decided, okay, if I load enough in, it doesn't matter that I get this exponential, or are you thinking about trying to control release in a more progressive fashion? Because obviously the big killing here will be retinal and vitreal treatments. So looking to the future, and I'm sure you have, what's your potential theory? Are you going that way or not? You've decided that you've got what you want, or?
So we've primarily looked at the cataract market because we know that the cataract market is short-lived, and we know that the need is huge because the number of patients having cataract surgery is so vast. I don't particularly see that slight peak of the drug concentration early on as a problem, because as long as it doesn't reach a toxic level, that is actually what we want clinically, because the inflammation in the eye is going to be greatest shortly after the surgery. So we do actually want a higher dose of these drugs early on. We've managed to achieve different drug release profiles because we've used different polymer blends. So the polymer blends that release at over 30 days are different from the blends that release over 7 to 10 days. And we have looked at nanopores. I think the largest nanopores usually are about 40 nanometers. And I think the dexamethasone is a 150 nanometer molecule. So I don't know how realistic it is to use nanopores for drug release.
CySaf go from really sub-nanoparticle size up to 30 microns. So there is a big range now.
Okay, interesting, very interesting. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
So
great paper, sorry.
Do you think with this technology, end of operation, we inject anterior chamber antibiotic, do you think this prophylaxis, endophthalmia prophylaxis, will not be used in the future?
I think that we should still use the antibiotic as we do at the moment. So we would inject the antibiotic intracameral cefuroxime as we do. We know that the injection that we give loses its, the concentration after 8 hours is below the minimum inhibitory concentration. So after 8 hours, the injection that we've given has lost its effect. But this antibiotic attached to the lens would last for 5 days, 7 days.
Okay, this is wonderful. Yes, Sophie.
Great presentation. Thank you. Very impressive. However, the most established slow release market, I think, is in gynecology, where they use intrauterine devices for birth control. And actually, and they last up to 5 years, in spite of the exponential decay. But as in ophthalmology, we were not so successful and yet. And what do you think, how stable from patient to patient is the release of these drugs? Because if we, for instance, have a rapid release of dexamethasone, then we could have pressure spikes or other side effects. What will affect the release of the medical ingredients?
Yes, thank you. That's a very valid point. So the model that we are using, the in vitro model, has taken its parameters based on the average flow of the average aqueous size and flow and turnover in patients who are of cataract surgery age. So of course there is a difference in patients who have very deep anterior chambers and large eyes compared to patients who have small eyes and narrow angles. But in terms of eye drop concerns, intraocular pressure you mentioned, there is some evidence in the literature that if you give an intracameral dose of dexamethasone, you get less of a pressure effect than if you use eye drops. There's a paper by Shah from 2018 that demonstrates that. So, and remember that although we're giving these drugs inside the eye, we're avoiding all of the toxicity and the allergy that can be induced from eye drop administration. So I think that the variation inside the front of the eye, the anterior segment, is going to be, there will be some variation, but it will be tolerable. So even though some patients have slightly deeper anterior chambers, I think that we could probably still use a one-size-fits-all drug, one-size-fits-all device. Of course, in patients who are known to be allergic to cefuroxime, for example, we wouldn't be able to use that. That would not be appropriate.
Sure, but don't you think that age would be a factor too?
In what way?
Like in young patients, we observe a much shorter duration for posterior capsular opacification to occur, for instance. Or how about posterior capsular rupture? Would that affect the release of the drugs?
Yeah, and I think that's a very valid comment that I think probably, I mean, we haven't tested this device in the presence of an open posterior capsule, but probably it's not going to be appropriate in the presence of posterior capsular rupture. But fortunately, that is rare. And in terms of age, I mean, when I operate, I don't normally change my drop regimen based on the age of the patient. I'm not sure what your practice is, but I tend to give the same dose of drops to everyone, and that works, very effectively. And so I think in terms of intracameral or intracapsular dosing, we could achieve the same thing by using the same dose for everyone. And of course, there will be patients who need a little bit extra, who need, patients who are prone to uveitis, patients who have got pre-existing ocular morbidity will need some other kind of additional treatment. But I suspect that one device will be able to treat or at least alleviate the amount of drops for the vast majority.
There is a question from attending people. What kind and brand of intraocular lens would be used? And second question, Mohamed Goreishi, would the nano drug will be incorporated during manufacturing process of the lens?
Thank you very much. That's two very valid questions. So we have tried attaching our drug delivery platform to multiple commercially available lenses from all the leading brands. We know that we can attach successfully to the hydrophilic acrylic and hydrophobic acrylic without any problem at all. We've conducted all of our subsequent studies on the market leading IOL, but we are confident that we could just switch to a different IOL. In terms of would the drug be incorporated? Yes, so we anticipate that the drug would be incorporated at the time of manufacture. And then that combined product, the drug attached to the lens, would then need to go through the standard ISO or ANSI testing. So it would have to go through sterilization and injection testing and compression testing and shelf life. But yes, it would be incorporated at the time of manufacture. So it wouldn't require any intervention by the surgeon. The surgeon would open the lens and inject it as normal.
So Michael has a question. Yes.
Yeah. So I think this is an exciting journey we're going here with the oracles today. So first we learned the future is eye drops. So now I'm learning the eye drops are the history. So that's an interesting journey here. That's great. But I really love your technology, and I think you made a lot of rabbits happy so far. So can you elaborate now, what is your translation now from going from the rabbit to actually first in human use to clinical trials? What are the challenges you foresee? And I think, are you going to go with one drug? Are you going to with all three drugs? When can we expect clinical results? Let's say in first in human use, and then let's say in a phase 2 study. So what is your pathway, and maybe share with us your challenging or questions in the clinical pathway going ahead?
Yeah, so we've done a safety study at the beginning. That was a relatively small study. We're now going to conduct a much larger animal study because we want to demonstrate the safety and efficacy of both a single drug and then multiple drugs and their release from an IOL. And then once we've done that, then we're going to go down the regulatory route in humans. But it's probably too early to see, for me to discuss the human trials. But large animal study later this year.
We have a unique opportunity here with Chris. Chris, could you give some thought as to companies incorporating this in their lens manufacture? I mean, what sort of time base do you see on that for one of the major IOL companies?
Philip, should I disclose that I may have a bit of an interest here?
Sorry.
No, it's okay. No, I've done some work with Visusnano. Personally, I think that this is a technology that would need to have the potential to be on every type of IOL. Because if you look at the market research that Philip presented, and the discussions that have been had with the doctors involved, it's very, very clear that, and we know this, you all know this, you have a personal preference in IOL. And so I think that will drive a lot of how things evolve, and the opportunity that Visusnano has to come to the market, because there's certainly an appetite for this approach, even though what has come before has not necessarily been successful, or has presented challenges that people didn't anticipate. So John, my personal belief is that it is something and that has to be available, at least offered up to, as many manufacturers as possible. But we'll see. That I don't, the path that the company takes, they're looking at all the options and everything, and it's in early stages. So I don't want to speak out of turn, but that's my personal viewpoint on the direction.
The point I was trying to make here was, if Alcon has a successful lens, and now they've got to coat it with XYZ,
right,
to go through regulatory approval with the FDA for compound A, compound B, compound C, compound ABC. That's a long process, and I can see one approach could be a startup company such as we have, producing a product and getting that through. I think that's going to be an easier route than trying to get the Alcons of this world committed to FDA for 5-10 years. I don't know.
I think, John, you spin it around and you look at, both the FDA and the EU have established pathways that allow for, are more cognizant of the fact that there's drug delivery devices that are coming to the market, and that this is something that we're going to see more on a more frequent basis in ophthalmology. Secondly, I think there is a potential based on that and what I know of the definitions, that you could argue that what Visunano is doing is a drug delivery device on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And so the potential is there to pursue a regulatory pathway. And I don't know if that's something that Visunano has thought about, Philip, or...
That's right. And the other thing to say is that these are all drugs that are known to be safe inside the eye. So they're already approved drugs.
Well, produce a haptic and then get Alcon to clip the lens in. Sorry.
Great stuff.
Supi?
Eileen, I would be very much interested in hearing my dear friends George Roaring's comments on this, because in the US, the drugs are much, much more expensive than in Europe, and they have to be paid out of pocket, whereas in the US, in Europe, they are mostly covered by insurance. What do you think, George?
Oh, thank you, Sufi. And congratulations on your technology, Philip. This is very, very exciting work. It is a real issue and a major barrier to care and compliance in the U.S., as Sufi mentioned. And the movement in the U.S. has been to compounded eye drops, so it's sort of an all-in-one formulation, and there's a number of commercially available compounding pharmacies now, and that's improved cost barriers. It's improved compliance. It's majorly streamlined the flow in the clinic and callbacks and all the confusion that we all have dealt with in the past. But we're seeing a tremendous amount of innovation, as we saw in the prior presentation that was so excellent, in drug delivery devices, whether it's intracanalicular, intracameral, drug elution in different ways. I mean, there's all kinds of new technology and development. And, I am curious, Philip, are you all looking at, I imagine you're looking at extending this to things like glaucoma drops and where that's another low-hanging fruit, I would think. I understand you have to pick your horizons, but is that part of your discussion, and are you all thinking about that in the future?
Absolutely. So that's the next stage of our development, is to add different drugs, because we know that with some optimization, we think we can incorporate most drugs. Of course, we have to adjust the polymer blend accordingly. But yes, that's right. So we could then we could have different products depending on which patient is having the surgery. That's right. So glaucoma drugs or even anti-VEGF.
So maybe, Philip, here's the opportunity. You have a lot of very enthusiastic ophthalmologists, researchers online. So, how can we help you?
Yes, that's exactly it, John. That's exactly it. Because we're currently, we're currently in the process of raising funds for our next round. But of course, it is very useful to hear these things, to hear that the need for eye drop is an obstruction to straightforward and easy care and compliance, and it would be great to have to all of you. I'll probably be calling on you in the next few weeks and months for your opinions, and we're going to have to get this through the regulatory approval process, and I'm sure I'll be contacting you separately.
Good luck.